time after each section for a few questions, but we do want to try to stick to the limit, so if we're getting a little too many questions, we love for you to stick around afterwards. Our representatives will stay a little bit longer and be happy to answer any questions that you might have. So, let's see, as well as I know we're going to have some questions for everyone watching on Facebook Live. Feel free to write any questions in, and we'll want to answer those throughout the conversation as well. So, I would like to introduce our presenters today. We have Michael Hallstrom and Alicia Truitt. So, Michael is a wealth advisor, congressional federal, he has a bachelor's degree in finance, holds a Series 7, 63, 66 life and health insurance licenses. He loves spending his time educating his clients on all sorts of financial decisions and covering with personal and small business questions, discussing retirement planning, asset protection, tax management strategies, estate planning, all sorts of good things. So he's a guy to talk to. We also have Alicia here, and we're so glad she's visiting with us today. So she's a practicing attorney in estate planning and elder law. She was named by her peers as a member of Virginia Super Lawyers Rising Star for 2007 and 2008 in Law and Politics magazine. So that's really neat. She received her Bachelor of Arts from the College of William and Mary, and her JD from George Mason University of Law. So she oversees drafting and execution of estate and capacity planning documents. She admitted to practice law in Virginia in the District of Columbia, the 2000. There you go. So, without any further ado, let's begin our presentation. So, y'all ready to kick it off? All right. Well, I'm going to start with our first question today. Again, it's our retirement roundtable. Let's dive right into it. So, broad question: how do I decide when it's the right time to retire, and how important is it to have a vision of what retirement is like in advance?
Thanks, Megan. That is kind of the big question, right?
Yeah, we're not going to keep you waiting.
When do I retire? How do I retire? Well, we need to have some context to work with in the first place. What are we trying to replace in retirement? What kind of income are we trying to replace when you retire? Typically for most folks, we are trying to replace your after-tax and after-savings annual income amount. So by that, I mean, if you take your annual income right now, say it's $100,000 a year, and you subtract off your taxes, and you subtract out the money that you're saving into your retirement plans, like your TSP plan or 401k, an IRA, whatever it may be. Well, that's money that you're not spending right now, right? You're not spending your tax money. You're not spending the money that you're putting into retirement savings accounts. Most people are spending the rest, right? And so that's a good number to start with as an annual income number that we will try to recreate once you stop working and go into retirement. So that number, along with whatever your retirement goal is as far as age is concerned, if it's age 65, whatever that may be. Let's just start with what your ideal situation would be for you as an individual. What would you like to see happen? What age would you like to retire? Well, we have to have something to base our plans off of, right? So once we understand what we're trying to accomplish as your retirement goal, then we can start doing some math behind it. The rest is really just a math equation, right? We run an analysis on everyone's situation that's called a Monte Carlo analysis. Has anybody in the room here heard of a Monte Carlo analysis? Okay. Well, you know how if you were, the way that normal people go about trying to figure out how or when they can retire is you might pick a date, your age, maybe 65, you have your annual income that you're trying to replace, and we have a life expectancy, right? Age 87, age 90, 93, whatever, you might want to plan for as far as how long you might live. Is there a question in the back there? Okay. We have to have something, excuse me, lost my train of thought.
Age, you were talking about age.
Jackson age, you think you're going to live.
First thing goes.
The mind.
Perhaps it's time.
Terrible thing. terrible thing to
Well,
say.
so the amount that you're saving every year, along with the amount that you have saved up so far, if you give yourself a particular rate of return, like 8% every year, as a growth rate on your investments, well, then you can figure out how much it takes to retire, right? That's just, you're just giving yourself a simple 8% average annual return, right? A Monte Carlo analysis, what that does, instead of just doing one calculation of what if I were to make 8% every year on my retirement investments, the Monte Carlo analysis is going to thank you, come on in.
Front row is
Sit down.
waiting for you.
A Monte Carlo analysis is going to run 1,000 trials on your situation using historical market data. It's going to take 1,000 different sets of historical market data, and it's going to tell us how many of those trials basically met or exceeded our retirement goal of not outliving our money. It's just a much better way, more efficient way of calculating whether or not we have enough to retire, instead of just using 8% as an average annual return number every year. We all know that the market doesn't do 8% every single year, right? It goes down some years, goes up some years. The only thing I can guarantee is that it's never going to do 8% every single year, right? And so I would encourage you all to look into, if you're doing some retirement planning or projections for retirement right now, whether you're doing a Monte Carlo analysis on your own by purchasing the calculator for it, or with a financial advisor, that's what you should be using as your barometer for whether or not you have enough to retire. There was a sub-question to that.
So how important is it to have a vision of what you want?
Well, exactly. And so financial planners talk a lot about goals. We have to have something to plan for. So what do you want for yourself? What do you want your future to look like? You have to write them down. We typically find that most people don't have their goals written down on paper. I would even start with things non-financial. I would start with your top 5 values, for example, knowing kind of who you are as a person and actually getting that down on paper, knowing what's important to you. Then we can start making decisions, financial decisions, that reflect your personal values. And so if we're always making decisions that reflect our values, then what happens tomorrow we're typically not going to regret, because to a certain degree there's going to be things that we can't prevent, right? Things that are out of our hands. But if we're making financial decisions that reflect our personal values, then we're typically going to be okay with what happens in the future.
No, I think that's a really good point, especially getting that vision, because I know a lot of people, particularly family members, when they have retired, they wanted to downsize and do a smaller house or move and things like that are going to be different than your normal life today. So I think that's neat to not just assume you want to live the same life right now, but see where you want to be in the future. So excellent. So we're going to move on to the next question. Like I said at the beginning, after this section, we'll take some questions before moving on to the next section. So what are some common mistakes that both of you often see people do, make before, can't talk. So what are some common mistakes that you see people do when preparing for retirement?
When preparing for retirement?
Preparing, yep. So, yeah, getting ready for it, yep. Saving and things like that.
I think the most common mistake that I see, except for just a lack of planning in general, which is, I'd say that's the most common thing I see, is people are just kind of going about their lives, maybe saving as much as they think they can, while still doing the things that are fun to them with their money, not thinking about it much beyond that. The other mistake that I see quite a bit of is using generic rules of thumb when it comes to the financial strategies they might be implementing in their situation. So I had somebody the other day tell me that they'd been told that they need to have 5 times their annual income saved up in their retirement accounts to retire. So I'm sitting here going, oh, well, how much, and I'm not going to give you this person's specific situation, we'll keep the numbers easy, it's going, but say you make $100,000 a year, 5 times that is $500,000, and they're saying that they heard as a rule of thumb that is all they need to retire by, say, age 65. Well, what's going to happen after 5 years, right? You're gonna have no money left. So I don't know where that rule of thumb came from, but there's wackier things that I've heard, wackier than that. So using generic rules of thumb, your thumb is not the same size as your neighbor's, right? That's the problem with the rules of thumb. Another one is 5% is a good withdrawal rate for retirement income. Is 5% a good withdrawal rate? Well, it depends on how long we need our money to last, and depends on what we're investing into, right? So, did anybody else have an example of a rule of thumb they've heard? Anybody else in here?
I know a rule of thumb, but like a mistake I see a lot is a lot of people will put their savings in just a non-interest savings account and have like a ton of money in it, but they could be doing so many other things with it to help generate some interest.
Yeah. But so yeah, I think that's probably one of the most common mistakes that I see. You need a financial plan that's tailor-suited, tailor-fitted to your situation. That starts by running an analysis on what we need to do to accomplish your retirement goal, not just somebody's generic rule of thumb for yourself. So.
All right. So last question in this section. What are some common mistakes you've seen people make once they retire? They've done all the steps right, they planned, they think, you like, that's great, you got all the money, you should be perfect. But what are some mistakes that you see people make afterwards? During retirement, I suppose.
Yeah. Probably the two biggest things are that people a lot of times think that the planning stops once they reach retirement, that, hey, once they have enough money to retire, and they don't really have to think about it anymore, you can just start withdrawing your income each year, and you really don't have to reassess your financial situation from year to year. We all know that life changes, the market changes, things happen in your life that cause your financial situation to be different, and we need to track our progress and adjust along the way. It's this evolving, proactive process of making sure that our financial condition is still in good shape from year to year. So, lack of continuing to plan. The other one is going too conservative with investments. Even for pre-retirees, I find that people are pretty risk averse nowadays because of what's happened over the past 10 or 15 years. In the market, we've been through two pretty big recessions, one in the early 2000s and then one from 2007 through 2009, and that scared a lot of people. Before that, if you were saving into retirement accounts before the early 2000s, things just seemed to go up non-stop, and you didn't have to worry about it too much. You maybe you even just held a few individual stocks, some blue chips, some big company stocks, and you just held those in your retirement account, or just a large company U.S. Stock mutual fund, and you just held it and it grew, right? Well, since then the market's gone haywire. It's really volatile. And so a lot of even pre-retirees are shifting their investments from growth-oriented investment products to really, really conservative investment products. And that just gets amplified when you get to retirement, because now you got to hang on to this money. Once you get to the point now you're relying on it for income, you're not working anymore, I got to hang on to this. I got to put it all into the G fund in my TSP account. Does anybody in here, I'm assuming some folks have a TSP account in here, right? Yeah. So we all know that the G fund is the government securities, or it's basically just a government treasuries fund, and it's supposed to not ever lose money. It's not supposed to make much money either, and so that's the problem. Nowadays we can live a long time into retirement. If you retire at age 65 and you live until 95, that's 30 years. Right? People are living until 95 pretty frequently now. And so we need to make sure that we have some growth long term. So we need to kind of balance that out, and that can come by sectioning off our income for the next number of years, the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, putting that into more conservative things, but then leaving the rest in more growth-oriented investments so that we actually get the increase in value that we need to not outlive our money long term. So.
Great. Alicia, do you have any do's or don'ts that you'd like to add to this?
One thing that we run into quite a bit in our practice is just people just simply not having a list of what they actually own. You don't have to have any fancy spreadsheet or anything like that, but just, a list of your basic accounts, you know, what you have in there, any real properties, interests, and we have a client right now that just doesn't know if, you know, as necessary. But that's one thing that, that we run into, that people actually don't have an organized list of their assets, and it really does help, and just not so overwhelming then to do what they need to do with those assets.
And that's the starting point with your firm, right? When somebody walks in your door and says, hey, I need some help, that's one of the first things that you have them do, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Just, you know, you just get a copy of all this stuff, and, you know, for our own clients, we'll make copies of everything, so we have it handy, so we can provide it as needed to other parties if they need us to. But it's just to get all that stuff together, and at the same time, check your paperwork where you have beneficiary designations and things like that, because sometimes those things get misfiled, or you forgot to update something, so, you know, just every year or two, just go through and update those things.
Perfect, that's a great suggestion, so I didn't know that myself, so that's a great idea. So those are kind of our big questions for the retirement do's and don'ts section. The other two sections we're gonna go into are managing investments in retirement and income planning in retirement. As of now, do you have any just kind of broad retirement questions? Yeah, go right ahead.
So in terms of owning your primary home, there's some rules that say you should not pay it off, that there's some benefit to having a mortgage, and others, I mean, I come from, my parents' generation was like, pay off that house.
Yeah.
That was the message, and it's worked for them for the most part, so any advice there?
Oh, absolutely. This is one I love to answer because, you know, I'm a numbers person, so if we start thinking logically about what our options are with paying off the home or not, it's easy to make sense of things, actually. Interest rates are low right now. 4 or 5% for a mortgage these days is not uncommon, right? Most people have refinanced their mortgages down to that rate if it was higher when you originally purchased your home. And even over the past 10 years or so, if you had just purchased a typical stock mutual fund in your TSP plan, the C fund, for example, rates of return have been higher than that, right? Higher than 4 or 5%. So if the question is, do we take extra money and pay down our mortgage more quickly, or do we take that and invest it? The answer is typically we should take that and invest it as long as we're willing to commit to that strategy longer term, because we know that investments can go down as well. In 2007 through 2009, we saw a big downturn, but what happened if you just held on to that stock fund through 2007 to 2009 and let it just come back around? By 2012, it was back up to where you started in 2007, and now the market's tripled since its low in 2009. It's literally tripled. So people that started saving for retirement, younger folks that started saving for retirement in 2009, that first dollar that they put into the market, a lot of times has tripled since then. And what has it been, 8 years since 2009? To triple your investment in 8 years? That's pretty powerful. So when you get into interest rate ranges like 7, 8, 9%, then we need to start paying down that debt aggressively, right? That doesn't make sense to continue to carry debt at that interest rate. I've seen some student loans that have 7, 8, 9% interest rates, and we need to start looking at that a little bit more closely. But before we go and pay down a low interest debt aggressively, let's make sure that we're balancing your financial goals, that we're putting some money toward the other things that are important to you before we take that extra dollar and pay down that debt more quickly, because we actually could get that debt paid down more quickly by investing the extra dollar, letting it sit there for 5 to 10 years, and then taking what we've saved up in that investment and paying off the remainder of the mortgage. You can literally pay off a mortgage more quickly doing that instead of just putting more toward the house. So you just think about what happens to that dollar when you put it into your to pay down your mortgage. What happens to that dollar after that? Disappears, right? The bank gets it. That's your money. Now it's equity in your home, right?
Yeah, but not really. I mean, it's equity in your home when you've paid it off to the bank.
Well, exactly.
Versus if you put it in the stock market, provided that the stock market happens to go up, then you've lucked out, or the stocks that you happen to have chosen. And at the end of it, the stock market it's a bit of gambling. I mean, you never know. I mean, plenty of us in this room lost plenty of money and in stocks which never came back. I mean, you know,
In individual stocks?
Absolutely, and
Sure.
in mutual funds.
Well, that's
I mean,
the
that money
asterisk.
isn't like across the board. The money that I had in there, you know, in 2007 hasn't tripled, that I can tell you.
Oh, so what fund are we talking about?
I have a whole host of them, including TSP, so.
So which fund in your TSP plan has
I
not
have
put
a
back
number of
around?
different funds. I mean, I don't have everything in C, but even if I had everything in C, I doubt that it's.
It has tripled since 2009. I can guarantee you the C fund has. Absolutely. The problem is that people get out of the market when it's down. That's the problem. Or if you're in individual stocks and you're in a company like Enron, then poof, your money can be gone, right? So if you're too concentrated, which the TSP funds are not, they're diversified within the asset classes that they invest into, right? So the C fund is 100% U.S. large cap stocks. The S fund is 100% U.S. small cap stocks. The I fund is 100% international developed economies large cap stocks. The F fund is 100% U.S. diversified corporate bonds. The G fund is 100% U.S. treasuries. But it's very, very spread out within each one of those asset classes, so you're not just sitting in one security. If you're sitting in one security, absolutely, that security could be gone overnight. Unless it's a treasury, we know that the U.S. typically pays its debts, right? Has a history of doing so anyway. We'll see here in the next 5-10 years. But anyway, the issue is people getting out of the market when the market's down because we're concerned about it. It does come back around eventually, but you have to have that time frame to be able to wait, right? And so if we're looking at putting an extra dollar into our home, the reason why I say it disappears is because you don't have access to it anymore. It's still your money. Now some of that dollar is going toward interest, but that extra dollar, if you're already covering the interest each month, that extra dollar does go to pay down your principal, right? But you can't get at that money again unless you borrow from yourself. You're borrowing from the bank, but that's your money, so you're borrowing to get access to your money. You're paying 4, 5, 6% to get access to your own money. So anybody that has home equity, I always recommend taking out a home equity line so that you have access to that money, not just frivolously spending on it, but using it as a safety net in case an emergency happens. I love home equity. I'm just not in love with the idea of paying down a debt aggressively when our alternative is we could invest it into a diversified fund, let it sit there for 5 or 10 years, and build more wealth that way, and have the flexibility if in the meantime an emergency happens, now we have access to that money that we've saved instead of putting it into our mortgage. Make sense?
All right. That was a great question. I'm just all new to me too, so this is great. So we're actually going to move on to our next topic. Like I said, if you have questions, we'll open it up at the end, and Michael and Alicia are going to stay a little bit afterwards too. So we'll hopefully get to everyone. So the next section is going to be managing investments in retirement. So we've touched on some of this already, but we're just going to dive a little bit deeper into it. So our first question is, what should I do with my TSP and other qualified plan assets before and during my retirement? So I know we've talked briefly about this, but if you can maybe give some more specific examples or what you would tell your clients, that would be great.
Well, it's really, and I'll continue on this thought a little bit, it's all about timing it's all about your timeline until you need the money. So what I mean by that is how we should structure our retirement investments is whatever point we start to need to pull income out of them, say it's 5 years from now, the near-term money, we need to start sectioning off into more conservative investments like the G fund and the F fund. And so what I recommend that people do is you basically build yourself hypothetical buckets or earmarks of money. So you're sectioning off money into different types of risk categories, basically. Anything that you might need to take out of your savings over the next 0 to 2 years, for example, maybe call that bucket 1, okay? tap into over the next 2 years, your bucket one money, you keep that all in cash and CDs. We know that cash and CDs don't grow a whole lot. CDs do a little bit better than cash, right? But they don't go down in value. They're guaranteed not to lose money, and that's the point. So anything that you need to access over the next 2 years, we put into something conservative that when it comes time to spend that money, it's not down in value. And we don't have to sell that investment when it's down. Anything that you need to tap into out of your savings over the next 2 to 5 years, so longer than 2 years from now, but less than 60 months from now, less than 5 years from now. Section off into diversified bonds or inflation-protected bonds, or even a long-term CD, if we want to really get rid of the interest rate risk with bonds that we all know. If you know a little bit about how bonds work, they have interest rate risk, and when interest rates go up, bond prices can go down. Well, right now we're at a low point with interest rates, so if interest rates go up, and we're holding bonds in our, what I would call this bucket two money, that, money that we're going to tap into 2 to 5 years from now, well, that can go down a little bit in value. One of the ways that we can get past that is just buying a 5-year CD, for example. So that's going to take your interest rate risk away. But the point there is you're putting it into something that's not just sitting in savings or money market. It's earning a little bit, but it's also not at risk in the stock market to go and lose 30 or 40% of its value come a few years from now when you need to tap into it, when you need to spend that money. So that's your bucket two money. Anything you need to tap into 2 to 5 years from now, put into diversified bonds or long-term CDs. Bucket three, then, would be anything that you don't need to touch for 5+ years from now. Okay? Anybody that's 5 years or more away from retirement at this point, this is your bucket three money. This is your typical growth portfolio, diversified growth portfolio. In your TSP plan, it's the L funds. Does everyone here know what the L funds are in the TSP plan?
No.
All right. Well, if you're familiar with the other funds in the TSP plan, you have the G, the F, the S, the C, and the I fund. And those invest in different parts of the capital markets, right? The L funds take your money and they invest it in a balanced way across all those 5 different funds, according to your timeline until you need to access the money. So there's an L income fund if you're already taking money from your TSP plan. You're in retirement, you're taking withdrawals, you can use the L income fund. And what that fund does is it properly balances your money across the 5 funds in the TSP plan for somebody who's taking income currently from their investment account. There's the L2020 fund for somebody who's planning on retiring around the year 2020. There's the L2030 fund, 2040, and 2050 fund. They're going to come out with a L2060 fund at some point. It just doesn't exist quite yet. So each one of those L funds, if you just pick out what approximate year you want to retire, turn age 65, turn age 60, whatever your retirement goal is, choose the L fund that lines up with that, and you're going to be instantly diversified in your TSP plan, as well as you can be with the options in your TSP plan. So.
Perfect. Anyone add, Alicia, to that?
No, I think the TSP related to that, just as far as we see, is just, again, just updating the beneficiary designations. Particularly if you had a reason to, in most cases after your spouse, or if you're not married, a lot of our clients have set up revocable trusts and, have various provisions for beneficiaries. And if you are going to be naming your trust as a beneficiary under any kind of plan like that, you want to work with your attorney on that too, just to make sure there's some specific language that should probably be incorporated if you do name your trust, just for tax reasons.
Excellent. Perfect. That's great advice. So I know even during TSP, that question you talked about all the great things you can do with your portfolio. Is there anything that I'm forgetting to ask that, in my retirement portfolio that I need to know what or how to invest with?
Uh,
I think we might have touched on this.
not off the top of my head, but.
Well,
I think
no, that's fine. I had a question about the L funds.
Mhm.
Does it make sense if you're not tracking the markets very closely in terms of international, spreading the resources through the different L funds? Does that make sense?
As a government securities fund, it really never goes down in value. Typically doesn't earn a whole lot. At least right now it's not, because interest rates are so low. The F fund fluctuates in value a little bit along the way. Gives you a very modest, conservative rate of return. Does a little bit better than the G fund, but that's your bucket 2 money. And then your bucket 3 money, 5+ years out, money that you're not going to touch. Even for somebody that's in retirement taking income from their TSP account right now, you could put it into the 2030, 2040 fund and let it grow. Just know that the further out that you get, like the 2040 or the 2050 fund, you're introducing a whole lot of potential volatility into your investment life there. So if you're not comfortable with seeing your account value go up and down like crazy, then stick closer to the 2020, 2030 fund. But it's also about the rate of return that you may need to get. So we need to couple your preference for risk with the reality of what you need to get out of your investments, right? So if we need to hit 7-8% average annual return long term with the majority of your assets just to make retirement work, but we're sticking everything in the L income fund or the L 2020 fund, that's probably not going to get us there. So we need to have some dialogue about that.
I think I saw another hand in the back.
Yeah, if I'm planning on retiring at 2030, and I have some money in that fund, the closer I get to retirement, does the fund get more conservative?
Absolutely, exactly. The whole idea there is, even for somebody in the 2050 fund, if you put 100%, say you don't retire until the year 2050, you put 100% of your funds into that one fund, every year that goes by, that fund is going to get more conservative and more conservative, so that it's limiting the ups and downs as you get closer to your retirement age.
Perfect, those are great questions. Oh, yes, another one?
Well, one quick question. When you get to be 70 and a half, you're required to do mandatory distribution. Yes.
Yeah,
Plan. Now,
unless you're still working for the government.
okay.
Yeah. So, I ran into a few recently who still are, and they actually like what they do, so.
All right,
Yeah.
but let's suppose, hypothetically, at the end of your life, now you're looking back and it's okay, you've been taking mandatory distributions. You have a little something on the side that you've been using also, in conjunction with what you've been taking out of the mandatory distribution. Now you look at the TSP account or whatever account, retirement account, and you see that you have quite a bit left in there. It's the end of your life. Now in terms of the beneficiaries now, right? Would it be more beneficial for them, for you, to start aggressively taking out?
Not necessarily.
No?
Depends on what their tax rate might be. So,
Well, you were taking it out, so
Right.
you were the one actually paying the taxes on it.
but this is the question, if I'm hearing you correctly, this is the difference between you aggressively withdrawing it or passing it on to them so that they can withdraw it themselves at some point, right? So when you say naming a beneficiary, I assume you mean whoever inherits your TSP account or your IRA for that matter. And if the question is, do I start withdrawing from that aggressively and pay taxes on that and then hand what's left over to your beneficiary versus not taking from it aggressively and passing what's in the TSP or IRA account to the beneficiary? What's better is going to be determined by the inheritor's tax rate, income tax rate. Because when they pull the money out, they're going to have to pay income tax on that in whatever their income tax bracket is. So if you're earning a heck of a lot more than they are, and maybe it's somebody who's younger, just starting out in their career, and your beneficiary, and they're not earning a whole lot of annual income just yet, they might get around taxes a little bit better than if you had withdrawn and paid taxes on it yourself.
Does that make sense to everyone? Good. All right, perfect. No, that's a great question. All right, the last question in this section I have for you guys is, first, what is a qualified asset? I hear this word thrown around all the time. And then, how do I plan for required minimum distributions on these qualified assets?
Well, a qualified asset is any investment account that's qualified for tax benefits. Typically, it's in the form of a tax deduction on your contributions to the account, and then tax deferral on growth that happens. So with your TSP account or an IRA account, when you make a contribution to either one of those types of investment accounts, you get to take a tax deduction on your contribution, lowers your current income tax, right? And then any growth that happens on that investment is deferred, the taxes on that growth is deferred until you start taking withdrawals, typically in retirement or beyond age 59 and a half. Another qualified asset is a Roth IRA. That's still qualified. The difference between a traditional IRA or a traditional TSP and Roth TSP or Roth IRA is that on contributions to a Roth TSP or Roth IRA, you don't get a tax deduction on your contributions to it, but it does have tax deferral on the growth that happens thereafter, and then you pull out your withdrawals income tax free when you reach retirement. So a qualified plan is simply an investment account, typically it's a retirement account, that's qualified for tax benefits, tax advantages.
Okay, that makes sense.
What was the other question?
It was just, how do you plan for like the required minimum? Like, I didn't realize there were a required minimum, so why is that?
Well,
How do you plan for it?
the government wants their tax money, and on a traditional TSP plan and a traditional IRA, they have allowed you to avoid taxes for now, so that you can choose to pay them later, pay the taxes later on the account. So a Roth TSP or a Roth IRA, they don't require you to take minimum distributions. It's just the traditional TSP or traditional IRA that requires you to take minimum distributions. Once you reach age 70 and a half, the government's going to force you to start taking withdrawals so that you pay some income tax on that money. They're not going to make you pay it all at once, but there's a calculation based on your life expectancy. So if you're 70 and a half right now, what was that?
There's actually.
They're voting.
Maybe they're going to take away the R&D requirement.
Not yet.
Probably not.
Right.
Taking away your tax deduction.
Second set.
Anyway, they'll have a life expectancy chart or table that's updated on an annual basis. So if you're currently age 70 and a half, they might say this, on average, somebody your age is going to live until age 88. There's 18 years or so between age 70 and age 88, and they're going to make you take 1/18 of the current balance of your retirement account as a withdrawal, as a required minimum distribution, and pay taxes on that. Then next year, there's going to be a new table because they're going to use current data on how long people are living on average, and they're going to do another calculation on an annual basis there, and they'll make you take one portion of however many years it is between now and your expiration date.
Nice way of putting it. Excellent. All right. So that's the last question in this section. Oh, I'm sorry that I have, but we're opening to questions now. So,
I want to be clear, with a Roth IRA, you said there's no minimum deduction, withdrawal,
There's no minimum withdrawal requirement. Yep.
even after you reach 70 and a half?
Correct.
Okay, question number two.
And just so the concept sticks, it's because you've already paid taxes on that money.
Okay.
You've already paid taxes on your contribution to that money.
Question number two, the required minimum distribution, does that calculation cover all of your retirement accounts? Put it in place, or say you have 3 accounts?
Well, you're going to have to take into account how much you have in pre-tax retirement accounts in general, whether it's
Just the total.
if you have an IRA and a TSP plan, the total between the two, you have to take an RMD that's based on the total between the two. It's just that if you're still working and you're age 70 and a half, you have to take from your IRA as a required minimum distribution, but you don't have to take from your TSP plan. Or if you're in a 401k, if it's not the government that you're working for when you're 70 and a half, you don't have to take from your 401k or basically your current employer retirement plan. If you're still working, you don't have to take that required minimum distribution, but you do have to take it from an IRA, even if you're still working.
Those are excellent questions. Yeah.
What about a SEP plan?
A SEP IRA?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so that's, if you are self-employed and you are currently, that is your employment, then you don't have to take from that SEP IRA. But not if you set up a SEP IRA 5 years ago, you were self-employed or you're an independent contractor or whatever it was back then, and now you're working for the government again, or any other employer, if it's not your current employment plan, then you do have to take it.
Great question. So, anyone else before we move on to the next topic? And I apologize, I didn't read all the topics earlier. We're going to do the income planning, insurance and retirement, and estate planning. So I apologize. We have a few more sections to go through. All right, so moving along to income planning in retirement. So, first question, how do I optimize Social Security benefits during my retirement?
Optimizing Social Security. Well, it just got a heck of a lot easier because the government just took a whole lot of filing options away from us last year. So there used to be, if you were in a relationship, if you were married, you could file and suspend or file restricted, and there was different ways to manipulate the way that you file so that you maximize your Social Security benefit. They took pretty much all that away. And so now it's really the thing that we focus on is when to make your claim, when to claim Social Security benefits. For old-time government employees, this wasn't even an issue because in the CSRS program, they weren't paying into Social Security at all. It's just like you retired and the government starts paying into your pension, and Social Security is not an issue. Unless you had worked in the private sector for a while and paid into Social Security for 40 quarters or more. Then your pension amount is going to offset your Social Security a little bit. But now in the first program, which I assume most of you are participants of, you're paying into Social Security. And then for anybody that's not putting in their full career with the government, you're paying into Social Security as well. So when to make a claim, full retirement age, or do you wait until age 70? Is that a common question that you all have run across? Yeah, you might retire at age 66, but you could maximize, technically, your benefit by waiting until age 70. Well, the rate of return that you get for waiting until age 70 instead of claiming at full retirement age is a pretty good guaranteed rate of return. It's 8% every single year that you wait. So if your full retirement age is age 66, and you wait, your income every year is going to increase, your benefit is going to increase by 8%, guaranteed until you turn 70, and then you can claim it then, and you'll be getting the most. But then, you have to live past age 80 to just break even on having waited, much less actually make money from that, so you have to get into your 80s to actually benefit from that. And think about what kind of life you're living at age 85 versus age 66, 67. You're having fun at 66, 67. You're not doing quite as much at age 85, right? So an example is my father is 67 years old, and he just retired this year. He has a master's in finance. He's very analytical, type A. I mean, he knows his numbers, right? He knows full well that he's going to get paid an extra 8% every year if he waits to take Social Security, but he's taking it now because he wants to fly grandkids to Florida and spend time with them. He wants to do a lot of things with that money over the next 4 years, or 3 years rather, where otherwise he wouldn't have that extra income to be able to spend. And he's not worried about the long-term impact of it because he's pretty well off, but he doesn't have extra money, but he's not worried about that aspect of it, right? Somebody that has money to blow, you have plenty of money to do all the things that you could ever want to do between age 66, 67, and 70, right? then maybe you wait, right? Because you could roll the dice, hopefully you live until age 85 and you have more money that way. Does that make sense, the way I'm saying? Yeah. So,
Perfect. All right. And then, thank you very much. Moving on to our next question. What's the best way to take pension benefits? I know you touched on pensions, but and I don't know if that's popular anymore, but what's the best way to go about that?
yeah, it's not extremely complicated. If you're married, do you choose the survivor benefit, or do you not choose the survivor benefit and get a little bit higher amount? And there's a 10% difference on the survivor benefit versus no survivor benefit. So choosing a survivor benefit on your pension plan is going to pay your spouse 50% of your pension if you were to pass away before then. It's going to lower your benefit by 10%, and I think that's a pretty great value to most folks. Another strategy that I've seen is some people will choose no survivor benefit, but they'll take 10% of their pension and purchase a life insurance policy with it that pays out a death benefit if they pass away prematurely. But then if they live a long life, or if you live the same amount of time as each other in your relationship, roughly, you die of loneliness, you know, then you will have gotten the extra 10%, and then there's cash value that pays out to your beneficiary. So
If you don't do those options and you pass away, the pension just goes away?
well, if you choose no survivor
No
option,
survivor, and you don't get life
and
insurance
you
on
don't buy
it?
any life insurance or something of that nature, then yeah, poof, it's gone.
I didn't realize that.
So, you're rolling the dice a little bit. There's no wrong way to do it. It's just, the wrong way to do it is not acknowledging the situation, not acknowledging the subject and making an educated decision for yourself, right? And then when to retire based on do I retire early and then go into the private sector? I mean, that's just a kind of one-off situation. I meet with a lot of folks that put in 20, 30 years with the government and then stop working for the government, start taking their pension, and go and work somewhere else. And that actually works pretty well if you do it early enough. I think if you do that at age 62 or so and work in the private sector for the next few years, then it doesn't make as big of a difference, but that's another thing that can help you wind up with a heck of a lot more in your retirement accounts if you cash out of the government, punch out of the government a little bit early, but having qualified for the full pension, and then go work in the private sector where you're typically getting paid a little bit more for doing the same type of work, and just banking that pension, just saving that pension income.
Great. Oh, that's great to know. Sure, question?
At what point do you do the survivor's benefit? Is that before you retire, or should you be doing it like now?
You have 3 years, I want to say, to name a survivor after claiming benefits. So when you retire, you'll claim your retirement pension income.
Okay.
You'll claim your retirement benefits, and that's the time to name a survivor or not. I guess it's only if you get married after you retire. If you weren't